Hi, I'm Ed Alexander, attorney and founder of Alexander Abramson, a business law firm here in Florida. Today, we are going to change things up a little bit. We've been doing the mailbag for several weeks, answering questions that come in from clients and referral sources. But today, we're going to do a case study. We're here with Bill Fulton. Bill is formerly the owner of an automotive repair franchise, and he sold his franchise late last year. So we're going to learn a little bit about that transaction from Bill, and hopefully that can help you with your transition.
Hi, Ed. My name is Bill Fulton. I've been in the automotive business for most of my life. My dad owned a Sunoco gas station when I was a young fella, and worked in it for about, I guess about 4 or 5 years. Graduated high school, went to technical college, and then I went to work for Goodyear for about 14 years up in the state of Maine. Moved down to Florida for some sunny, warm weather, and went to work for Bridgestone Firestone, where I worked in a management position running stores for them for about 13 years, and decided I was making them lots of really nice money, and decided to make even more for myself by going into a franchise business. And there was an opportunity across the street from the location that I was working at, and I went and inquired about it, and was able to purchase it and start in 1997.
So 1997 to 2019. So that's quite a run.
That is correct, yeah. We were so successful in our kickoff of our store that we exceeded the goals and expectations of Tuffy Associates Corporation for opening stores in the history of their company. And so 3 months later, they were offering me a second location over on West Colonial Drive. And it was kind of new, and we were a little concerned, but we took on the opportunity. All the goal was to continue to grow stores and add to the store count. And so at the same time, we were also looking at building multiple locations. And so we took over the second location and got it off the ground, doubled the sales in the location, while we built out the third location in Oviedo on Mitchell Hammock Road. Unfortunately, with construction delays that were going on, it actually took about 18 months to build that location. It was way behind schedule, but in 2000, we opened that location. Business was growing and going very well. Again, we were in the top 10 of the company's performing stores in 2 of the locations, the Oviedo location and the East Colonial. The West Colonial store was more of a challenge. It was in a challenging part of town. And it didn't do very well with all of the marketing and sales abilities that we have, or I have, and experience. I couldn't really get that store to turn around. I had partners when I started, and the first location, and they were in the other 2 locations as we added them.
Let me stop you there, Bill. Let me ask you a couple of questions. First off, let me say that that noise that we're hearing from behind you is because you are assisting the buyer of your third location there, and working in that business with him to help him and make him successful. So if you hear some banging and crashing in the background, that's just that business going on and doing its thing. So you mentioned that you had partners. Did you have partners from the first location?
Yes.
And so
the first location was East Colonial Drive. And yes, I had 2 partners, 2 minority partners.
And so, you were the basically the working partner. You did the work in the shop, managing the shop and doing all those things, and they provided capital. Is that right?
That is correct.
Now, there came a time when you ultimately bought them out, right?
That is correct.
So how did that work?
Well, it didn't work very well. In 2006, I had 2 really good Monday morning quarterbacks while the company was thriving and growing, and we wanted to expand to more stores, but the partners weren't interested in putting any more capital in. They just wanted the company to go out and borrow and go out on a limb from a company standpoint rather than from an investment standpoint. So the partners weren't interested in investing any further. And so it became clear that it was time for me to make a decision to get rid of the partners and buy them out and just become a sole owner. And then we were able to do that through the success of selling the Oviedo location. And with the proceeds from that, we were able to purchase out, my wife and I were able to purchase the partners out of the corporation.
So after you sold the Oviedo location, you bought them out. What happened with the West Orlando location?
The West Orlando location was not prospering at all. But when I took it over, it was a really struggling store. And so I had written into the contract that if the store wasn't performing after a 5-year period to a profitable level, that the corporation toughie that is franchisor would take it back with no consequences to me. And so we exercised that option.
So that's a really important point, right? You went into this, you planned, you looked at this and you said, hey, this location doesn't match what is normally a successful location for this franchise, and I'll give it a go, but we want the ability to pull out, because as you know, once you enter a franchise agreement, you're bound for the term of that franchise agreement, and you as a franchisee are generally not going to be able to get out of it.
That is correct.
So you close, or did you close it, or did you give it back to the franchisor?
Well, that's a really good point, because we notified them that we wanted to give it back to them. And it really took about 6 months for them to allow us to give it back to them. And when we finally had that final meeting, they said if I couldn't run the store, they couldn't run the store, so close it. So they didn't want to take it back. They continued to pay the lease and other expenses that went along with the location, but they did not want to run it as a company location. And they have multiple company locations around the country as of today still.
So even they looked at it and even said, well, this location, the demographics, what it's been able to do just doesn't work. And hey, that's a nod to your management ability. That's fantastic that they ultimately said that.
Right.
So now you've taken care of the partners. So you've gotten out of the partnership. You sold off one location. You closed / gave back a second location, and now you're here with the third location. So this is, now you have one location. What year is this, where you and your wife are the only owners and you have one location?
2006.
So from 2006 until 2019, you're operating this, making this work, making it profitable. At some point, you kind of think to yourself, hey, I'm ready to move on, to either retire or move on to something different. Which was it for you?
That's a very good point. In 1997, when I started, I was looking to get out. And so we had been planning right from the beginning that this was going to be a succession type of a business. And we were hoping that all of the elements of it would work. So in 1997, when I left Bridgestone Firestone Corporation and had been there for, like I said, about 13 years, my whole crew that was working with me at that location left and came to work for me at this Tuffy franchise.
Wow, that says something right there.
Well, and I'm proud to say that 6 people came, and 4 of those 6 people still work at this location some 22 years later.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty amazing, especially since in your business, right? Ultimately having, well, frankly, any service business, your people are going to make or break that business, because they're the ones doing the work. and they're the ones interfacing with your customers. So at the end of the day, the value is in really the human capital, right? The bodies that walk out the door every night, and you want them to come back. So that ultimately, that is where the value lies in any type of service business. So how
Well,
did you?
there isn't any silver bullet to any one of them. That is a very key and important part of the business is the people. It definitely has an effect on everything. But right from the very beginning, I was trying to mentor and train the manager that came with me to be able to operate this with a goal down the road of eventually buying me out and taking this location over. Um, and I've encouraged him to start working on the same thing for himself so that in 10 or 12 or 15 years, when he's ready to retire or slow down, that he'll have somebody that will easily slide into the position and keep it going and keep the business functioning, very successful.
So that's one of the things that we're always stressing is this idea of making strategic decisions based on 5, 10, 15 years down the road. Because at the end of the day, you always have a succession plan. Whether you made it or whether it's a default plan, you have a succession plan. Because
That's correct.
one day you're leaving your business. You may walk out the door or you may be carried out on a stretcher, but one day you are absolutely leaving your business never to come back. And the only way to be sure that your family gets the value that you've created through your hard work in that business, much harder than any employee usually works in a business, is to make sure that that succession plan is in place. So you go into this in 1997, right? 22 years before the ultimate succession occurs, thinking to yourself, hey, at the end of the day, this has got to be saleable because I'm not going to do this forever.
That's correct.
And so ultimately, you've been talking with your manager about this transition for years, right? You've been putting them in the spot of running the business themselves, and you're stepping back, not really involved in the day-to-day every single day. And so now, how do you have that conversation with the manager to say, hey, it's time?
Well, I mean, it was having people work for you for 22 years. There's only so far you can continue to promote them without having the conversation about, okay, what are we going to do down the road when I start slowing down and you need to take this over? There's an investment that you've been putting in through your work and your emotions and your care to the customers, and that needs to pay off. And how we're going to get that to pay off is by transitioning the business from myself to you. And we really focused on that in the last, I want to say, 3 years. We started talking about, okay, at the end of 2019, I want to be out. I want to have this into your name, and we need to start focusing on what we need to do to accomplish that transaction. And then in 2018, we contacted the Small Business Association, which was the provider of the loan, and they said that that was probably too soon, that we needed to wait until the beginning part of 2019 if our goal was to close the end of 2019. And so we really began focusing on it at the beginning of 2019. And from a management standpoint, I stepped further and further away, allowing him to make basically all of the day-to-day operational and then some of the business planning decisions on his own so that I could kind of continue to mentor.
That's great. So, I know that you're saying you really started to look at it 2019, but you were laying the groundwork long before 2019. And a lot of business owners are concerned about talking with their employees about succession planning. And one of the things we're always talking about is whether or not you are talking to them, it's in their heads, right? Because they see that you're getting to an age when there might be a retirement, and they're concerned about that. And so by having the conversation up front, you really allay those concerns. You bring them into a team environment, and really that conversation about how do you get value out of this business for all the hard work you're putting into it is exactly the way to approach it. So great job with that.
Sure, thank you very much. Yeah, but it takes the buy-in of the employees and an open line of communication, because we have employees that perhaps had no interest. We had 6 employees that came with us, and 4 still work here, but not all 6 of them or all 4 of them own the business. Only one of them does. The others continue as a team, but we've always tried to keep that line of communication open. What were they looking for? And some of them are just looking for a job, truthfully, Ed. They're looking to make a living. They're looking to have some security. They're looking to be appreciated for their hard work. And then some others are looking for opportunity. And that's really kind of what it came down to.
Yeah. So what you're using the phrase of communication, but for the one that we talk about is expectations, understanding expectations, setting expectations, making sure that if somebody has an expectation that cannot be satisfied, that they understand that that expectation can't be satisfied. And then also molding expectations to reality, because sometimes people just aren't realistic in their expectations. So now turning to the actual transaction itself, the transaction was a finance transaction, and we ultimately used an SBA loan to do the transaction. I'm wondering how what your impression of was of that process, of the SBA loan process itself.
Well, it was exceptionally easy from my standpoint. As I said, we sold the location in Oviedo, and we really took a School of Hard Knocks lesson on that location. And so we did a much better job of record keeping and accessible records when it came time to provide all that they were going to need and verifiable information for the loan to actually happen. That was much more difficult the very first time around because we didn't know what they were really looking for. But having that ability to go through that process helped me in this process because we had seen it before, and we knew not to get excited and nervous every time there was another question about something, or that it wasn't going to actually kill the deal. It was just another question that needed to be overcome. And we ran into many. We had our share of concerns between the franchisor and the landlord for the property, and there were some opportunities to overcome there for sure.
Yeah, and there always is. I mean, obviously documentation is key. So the financial statements, the tax returns are very, very important. And then did they do any background review? So look at the bank statements, for example.
Yes, of course, yeah. We had to provide 3 years worth of bank statements as well as P&Ls for the SBA. They all had to be accountant certified so that they knew that they weren't just made up of some sort, or that they weren't just off of our books, but they were actually provided by a certified public accountant. So
Right.
Absolutely.
So, all right. So there's a really important point in terms of the succession planning, right? Is that the financial statements, the tax returns, spending some money to get the professional advisor to do that work 3, 4, 5 years in advance is essential to getting the transaction done, because not only does it speed up the lending process, but it really makes you capable of getting that loan.
That is correct. It also makes all of your information viable. It's transparent. You can see it.
So
and it makes it more valuable because you can see it.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned School of Hard Knocks in the Oviedo transaction. What was the one takeaway you had out of that transaction that you said, oh gosh, other than the financial statements, oh gosh, we won't do that again?
I guess it would have been that we started talking. I guess the most challenging part was, at that location, we had the partners involved, and they were chomping on the bit to get that closed so that they could get out. I'd already had the conversation that this was what was going to happen, um, because I made sure when we were allocating stock that I was controlling the majority of the stock, so that I was also the one that could, have the driver's seat about what was going to happen. So keeping the partners at bay, I guess, was one of the biggest challenges. And then it was just a matter of providing all of the necessary paperwork that was required in order to get that deal closed. Um, and there were many, many times during that first deal, because I just didn't know how it worked, that I just didn't ever think. I resigned myself to the fact that if it happens, great. If it doesn't, well, it just doesn't, because I don't know what else to do. And it seemed like at every point, every other day, there was another stumbling block that didn't seem like it was going to uh, get through it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's a really important takeaway, because that happens in so many transactions, is that they tend to be a roller coaster, right? Because you get good news, you feel like you're high, you're on the top, things are going to happen. And then boom, something comes up and it feels like it's a disaster and the transaction's never going to close. And so you constantly ride this roller coaster as it goes on. I'm always, I don't know if you remember the movie Pretty Woman, and Edward, the rich guy, says to his lawyer, just make it happen, right? Well, it never happens that way, right? And at the end of the day, you have to be involved throughout the entire process, because it is going to be that up and down as things go on. So let me ask you this, Bill. As you look at what you've done over these past 22 years, if I'm a business owner watching this video saying, what should I do right now to make my business ready for a succession, what advice would you give them?
I would advise them to start planning for the succession early as possible. Um, um, Keep very good records. Um, Definitely, plan to succeed and then work the plan, because the better documentation that you have for whatever business it is, it's easier for the person that's coming in to continue on and be successful. Because at the end of the day, I worked very hard to get this business successful, and I want to see it continue to be successful. It isn't always just about the money that you get at the end of the day. It's all the hard work and effort that went into building the business. And I'm looking for it to succeed. I'm looking for the individual that's owning it now to succeed, but for the business in itself to succeed. So have a good plan in place on what you do and how you do it. And so that's transparent for the person coming in to continue on that success.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time today to tell your story and to give these pointers. This is really important information that every business owner needs to know. So thank you very much.
Not a problem. Thank you very much for all you did for me.